Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very last ScenoLab seminar. It's my pleasure today to be outside, behind, in front of the camera, whatever you will, in another perspective, and to welcome you all here today. So I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners, the land across Australia where we're all coming from today and joining you. For myself and for here, we're in Meanjin in Brisbane, so the Yagara and Turrbal people. And as we've done the last couple of weeks, if you want to pop into the chat where you're joining us from today so we can acknowledge those traditional owners, that'd be amazing. So we pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. We recognise sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So again, just the final little spiel before we kick off in today's session. Some of you have heard this. This will be our third time now, but for some of you, this will be the first time joining us for the ScenoLab seminars. So ScenoLab Australia is a national collaborative network for researchers, educators and practitioners in performance design of all forms, architecture, interior and spatial design and performance technologies. Australian residents are welcome to join us now for free. Fees are currently waived until 2025, and don't worry, we'll give you plenty of warning if that changes at any point in the future. And we're lucky to be supported by a couple of universities at the moment who are helping us keep those fees waived. As I mentioned last week, if you the Australian resident label this is not, we don't need to see any documentation. We're not a government organisation. It's just simply a way of kind of, creating some criteria for people who may want to join, because we are also, as I'll talk about in a second, the National Centre for OISTAT, or the International Organisation of Scenographers, Theatre Architects and Technicians. And there are many national centres around the world. And so we are Australia's national centre. And so we welcome anyone who wants to be a part of us, but we also acknowledge that there may be a national centre in your country that you might be coming from. And I take a moment to acknowledge a couple of the executive who are here from OISTAT at the moment. Wan Yun, and I think I saw Wei Peng as well. Hello, thank you so much for coming along to our third session today. And so as we've mentioned the past couple of weeks, this is what we're looking to do. We're a new organisation. We are Australian run for Australians, and we are all volunteers who are doing this because we're really passionate about creating community and continuing conversations around Australian performance design. And so we will be holding an AGM for members at some point coming up before the end of the year. It's a bit of business we have to do. And we're also looking at other talks, other networking opportunities, etc. But we really are interested to hear from you and to hear from people who might be thinking of things you want, conversations you want to have, things you want to talk about, ideas you want to share, and maybe how as ScenoLab we could help support you in building that those conversations. So please do let us know. Okay, as I mentioned, we are the National Centre for OISTAT. And so OISTAT is a global network of theatre makers celebrating design, technology and live performance. And so from this amazing map that you can see here, now give me 1 second. I just need to mute someone so I can hear them. There we go. Again, the power of being the host. Sorry, everyone. So here you can see all the OISTAT centres around the world. So as a ScenoLab member, you automatically become an OISTAT member. And so you can save the individual member fees attached with that. And by joining OISTAT, you can have access to updates, calls for competitions, events, symposiums. But really importantly as well, it's also a way of connecting with international peers who are interested in a whole bunch of different topics around performance design and technology. So the main sort of mechanism for this is through the OISTAT commissions, which you can see here. And so when you join ScenoLab, we ask you to let us know your interests across these areas. And one thing we'll be doing once we finish up these seminars is contacting people who've registered as a member and kind of getting that process going of connecting you to all of these commissions. So these are groups from people from all over the world who are interested in the same stuff that we are, and can be a really amazing opportunity to sort of expand your networks. So I'll share in the chat as well when we jump into it a link. You posted this before, but you can register. If you have any questions, you can reach out to myself. Sorry, hi, I'm Tessa. I'm the chair of ScenoLab, and I'm part of a small but mighty volunteer management committee, which includes the wonderful Tanya Bear here, Madeline Taylor, who you'll also meet today, and then Imogen Ross, who may or may not be on the system. Sorry, Imogen, I can't see the participants right now. But thank you so much for joining us. And I'll end on this final note that all the seminars have been recorded, and I will be releasing those videos next week. I've just been waiting for sign off from all the panelists, but they'll be going up online. And so keep an eye on our social media, I think, for when that's done. Okay, spiel over. And I'll hand over to the wonderful Tanya now.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're coming to you from Griffith University's Creative Arts Research Institute, also known as CARI, which I am a member of. And I'll introduce myself first. I'm the host for today in this session that we're having on research and sonography. So my name is Tanya Bear, and I'm an ecological designer, community artist, educator, and researcher. And I'm also the co-director of the Performance and Ecology Research Lab, which is based here at CARI. And I also teach as part of the Queensland College of Art and Design, and I teach in the spatial design, interior and spatial design stream there. My background is as a set and costume designer. I trained actually straight out of high school. I went back to my home country of Austria, and I trained there from 1995 to 2000 before coming back to Australia. And I have worked in the performing arts as a stage designer for probably about at least 20 years or 23 years. I've also worked as a creative producer. I work now more as a practitioner academic. My focus has been on ecological design for performance. And I started my PhD and went back to study in 2011, at the end of 2011, finished my PhD in 2016, and then did a couple of postdocs and then landed here at Griffith. So that's a very quick rundown of my research pathway. But I guess what we're interested in here today is learning more a bit about how research and the field of sonography, performance design, technical theatre production intersect. And I would say that in Australia, we have only really a handful of sonographers or people in the field of sonography that have PhDs. I don't know if we could count them all on one hand, but maybe it's getting a little bit more than that, but it's, it's a very, very small community. However, we're increasingly seeing performance designers going into PhD study, which is really exciting. So it's becoming, I know when I started in 2011, it was really a bit strange. I didn't know anybody else who'd done a PhD or who was doing a PhD in my field. But I would say that that's been rapidly changing. And I'm really interested in the conversation that we're going to have today around what does it mean to study performance design or do research in this area, and particularly in the context of Australia, because obviously this is very much in the context of Australia conversation. So, and I want to just acknowledge a couple of people that have come from other countries online. I saw a few names, and thank you also for joining us, because it's also great to hear more about what research is happening in other parts of the world as well. So feel free to join that conversation. So I might just start by asking my panelists to introduce themselves. I think that's a really good thing, is just maybe just ask them who they are and how they came to research. So I'll start with Tessa.
Okay. Hi again. So I'll put my different hat on. So my name's Tessa Rickson, and I started life thinking I wanted to be on the stage, and then went to university and studied drama. and realized absolutely loved it, but the life of an actor was not for me, and realized that everything that went into making live performance happen, I absolutely loved, was just obsessed with it. And so moved from the sort of on stage to off stage, went and studied technical production at QUT, and then worked as kind of anything and everything for many, many years, from lighting and projection design through to technician across multiple venues, to festival coordinator, logistics coordinator, across like venues or organizations, everything from independent dance work through to sort of larger state-based organizations. And so kind of like found myself, I was kind of a bit of a, I loved doing everything and kind of didn't have a desire yet to sort of kind of reduce or focus on one particular area. But while I was also doing that work, I stayed connected to the university that I graduated from. And kind of, it was a bit of a slow trickle, because when I sort of finished my undergrad, a couple of friends of mine had done a year of honours research before me. And I saw them, and they seemed to be, one of them who's actually online here with us, Maddie, it seemed to be this year where you could play and make something and experiment with ideas that was all yours. You kind of got to do whatever you wanted. And I'm like, I want to do that. And so like I'd finished my undergraduate, I was working, but I was also doing my honours research, looking at interactive real-time performance environments. So lots of tech stuff. And I also kind of discovered I'd always been a nerd all through school, but this was a chance where I got to do deep dives into philosophy, into all of these people who'd writing. We'd barely started using the word sonography at this point. And so I was kind of just learning about this different approach of thinking about the total environment of a performance work. So I did my honours, absolutely loved it. And then after years of sort of working, came back to cover someone on maternity leave, and then kind of got some sessional work, and then came back in on a 0.5 contract, and then, you know, found the holy grail of employment in university in Australia, which is a full-time ongoing job. Only about a year and a half ago, kind of did that happen. And all through that, found, of course, there's all the stuff we've talked about the past couple of weeks in terms of the education side of things, practice side, but just found that doing research, whatever that meant, and it has meant so many different things for me over the years, just sparked so much joy in what I did. And so, so now I am a senior lecturer at QUT, and I have a substantial part of my work is doing research. Yeah.
Oh, great. Amazing. What a journey.
Sorry, that might have been too long.
No, that was perfect.
Cool.
I think it's great to hear like that trajectory, and I think it's actually quite a common one in some ways. I think I would say that I followed slightly similar one too, in terms of having a bit of sessional teaching and a bit of exposure to other people doing research, and then getting excited because it looked like so much fun. And also I'm a nerd, so I think maybe that's what all joins us all together. All right, Penny, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Penny Challen. I am also a nerd, proudly stated. I was very much a nerd at high school, and I fell into theatre by complete accident, which was absolute serendipity, because I discovered it was absolutely what I was meant to do with my life. I've been in theatre. I graduated NIDA in 2001, so that does make me feel quite old. After studying fine art here at QCA, which is where we are at the moment, I have come to research really late in my life, but it is so joyful, because it is just to have that. I think as designers, one of the things that we all love and do is to interrogate, and it is how do we, obviously we work with technology, and we work with space, and we work with fabrics, and we work with all of these mediums, and time being the really important element that brings those things together. But the real joy about research is that we can actually have a level of in-depth of interrogation that you can't ever actually get from theatre practice alone on its own. And I think it's, for me personally, I'm currently actually doing my honours year. Tanya is my supervisor, and I hope to go down a PhD pathway with Tanya. But particularly right at this moment in time, after 20 years of practicing in a very unsustainable way, and with the climate crisis the world is currently facing, and I was extraordinarily lucky to come and work as a research assistant for Tanya and Imogen, who's online. Hello, Imogen, on a project for them recently. And it just completely made me go, this is a really great opportunity for me to really rethink how I create work and what is the process and the structure of what that work creation actually looks like, and interrogate it with a different lens that is not necessarily obvious from when you're just in your studio by yourself doing practice. So I think that's where I come from.
Great. Thanks, Penny. That's awesome. And Maddie, tell us a bit about you and yourself and your research.
So Maddie Taylor, hi everybody. I kind of had a little bit of an unusual start to the industry in that I was very fortunate to get a traineeship straight out of high school to go work at the Queensland Theatre Company in their costume department. And kind of that apprenticeship model has, was how we used to work in theatre, and now has kind of completely gone by the wayside. So I did a year's kind of traineeship then, and that kind of training kind of continued for a couple of years. I kind of worked for Queensland Theatre and then Queensland Ballet, kind of in kind of various roles, working my way up. And while I was doing kind of working full time in the industry, kind of that transition to full time work, in kind of across freelance full time, right? I was also doing my undergraduate degree. I decided I'd kind of go off and do uni on the side. And after a while, I kind of really enjoyed uni, but was working full time and having a great time. But then I decided I was going to do that kind of classic year in the UK gap year thing, kind of in my mid-20s. And I managed to, via my cousin who worked at the British Museum at the time, hook up with someone at the V&A Museum and kind of line up an internship there. And that was with Donatella Barberi, who's now kind of one of the more foremost kind of costume researchers in the world. And she, that was that thing of exposure, right? Like learning, seeing what people were doing, and that people could sit and do research as a job. And working in the V&A archives, it was extraordinary kind of experience. So I was kind of there for about 4 months, kind of 1 day a week, doing kind of an internship with her while working all the horrible jobs in the UK and being very miserable in the cold. But that was extraordinary and really the highlight of my time there. And it kind of really orientated me to what research could be, working in a kind of peak body like that was extraordinary. So when I came back to the UK from the UK, I decided to go and do my honours. And in the background to all of this also was I was having some health issues at the time with kind of using my right hand. I had some hand surgery on my right hand, and it kind of became apparent that I wouldn't necessarily be able to rely on my body to earn my income, which was a kind of a big, that was how I was, being able to use both of my hands, really important, obviously, in kind of the really technical and neat detailed work of costume. So kind of thinking about that, kind of going, can I rely on my body to earn my income? Maybe I need to actually rely on my brain, kind of more so. Not that, research work requires bodies and brains, and so does technical work, but the kind of the balance is different. So when I kind of started to do my honours year, it was definitely about kind of thinking about transitioning into a different kind of pathway. And then I finished my honours and then went back into technical work for kind of about 5 years full time again. And then kind of decided actually I was going to pursue it. So went off to do my PhD in 2017 at the Victoria and Albert, no, not Victoria, sorry, the VCA in Melbourne. And both my honours studies, which was looking at how costumers were responding to basically internet shopping and the kind of rise of online sourcing, and kind of how that was impacting kind of employment and kind of approaches to costuming at the time, which was really sparked by a comment that Wesley Enoch made asking, could they just buy something online? And I found at the time I was quite incensed by that. Because I felt that it was very dismissive to kind of the skill and the capacity of their costume workers. And so that kind of sent me off on this great research path. And then my PhD kind of took a look at a similar thing, basically looking at the kind of emotional intelligences required to collaborate in costume work, particularly in a hierarchy where there's different power balances. And that was kind of really in response to my consciousness that like at the end of a fitting day, it was so emotionally exhausting kind of doing that work, and kind of why that was. So yeah, so kind of really my research is very much focused on kind of practitioners in the room and what's kind of going on in kind of major theatre companies in there. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much, Maddie. And it was great that you managed to get your research in there too, because that was going to be my next question around what everybody is working on at the moment.
Did we mention Angela?
Yeah, I'm going to mention Angela.
Sorry.
So we actually had a fourth panelist here today who unfortunately can't make it today due to unforeseen circumstances. So Angela Go is currently doing a PhD with me at Queensland College of Art and Design, and her work is in expanded scenography and placemaking. So it's really sad that she can't be here today, and hopefully we can get her back next time. And I'd also want to acknowledge that we're all Queensland based here today. We've hopefully had a pretty good mix across the 3 sessions. So this is a Queensland only session, but I also want to acknowledge that there's many people doing research across Australia as well. So yeah, it'd be good to have another research session that sort of talks about those links across the country. So my next question really is about just giving you all a chance to talk a little bit more about what is the current research that you're doing. So it's a case if you're an academic, so you work full-time at an institution like I do, that you are doing research quite a lot of the time, and you might be doing many different research topics, so not necessarily one project. There might be many projects and a few different intersecting themes to what you do. So I'll start with Tessa again and about what kind of research topics maybe something, because I know you're very intersectional in the way.
I just wrote down the word intersections.
You have got a few fingers in a few different pies.
I like thinking about intersections because I definitely think that as someone and I feel so I genuinely feel so privileged to be able to do research as part of my work. And those of you who are able to do that within a university or hope to do it, you'll know that we're at the whim of shifting tides in terms of workloads, university, genders, etc. And so I think that is reflected in some of the research that I do, in that sometimes it does kind of pick up on some of those, like, okay, we're kind of moving this way now, so I'm going to move this way and see if I can kind of make it work for me. But in terms of those intersections, and this might come up again, but thinking about a very, very wise woman said to me very early on, think about the story you want to be able to tell about yourself through your research. And so as random as some of my stuff is, I do try to think about, okay, how does it fit into, for me, basically it's Australian performance design, technology, and sustainability. So if it can go somewhere in there, then it's worth kind of pursuing, or at least I can kind of tell a story. So I didn't answer your question. At the moment, yeah, I've got a few fingers and pies. I am part of some long-running research with people like Tanya and like the Pearl Institute and some of our colleagues around the world looking at sustainable approaches to performance design practice and teaching as well. And so that's something that's really, I'm really passionate about in terms of how we can work with our next generation of students to sort of change the way or challenge the way we have done things before, to sort of, you know, reapproach. And I'm stumbling on my words here because I'm basically just quoting Tanya's research, but moving away from like a linear production process to more that circular economy approach, which comes from the wonderful Tanya. And so this has been a very meaningful partnership for me in terms of my research. But so for me, it's particularly looking around those sustainable, how do we, the main field I kind of look at is technology and performance design, or digital scenography is the term for it that's kind of been in the works the past couple of years. And so for me, some of the research I'm looking at doing is around sustainable practice and technology. So what that might mean, what are the impacts of looking at technology, what those, you know, yeah, there's lots of sticky questions around that. But so as well, sort of, yeah, so the sustainable performance design and pedagogy approach, also looking at, I'm really passionate about Australian performance design. And so I've been very fortunate to sort of have opportunities to, there was a special edition a couple of years ago, which several people who are here online, you know, were able to kind of contribute articles to, but looking at Australian scenography. You know, even kind of helping to bring together ScenoLab comes from that research passion of showcasing and celebrating, but also capturing and preserving and sharing Australian stories. I've got a chapter that's in the works at the moment. I did a deep dive into this incredible female designer who I stumbled across a couple of years ago. Her name's Desmond Downing. She was working in the 50s and 60s. She was one of the first team that went over to PQ in 67. So Australia's been going to PQ since it started. And there was this one note in the PQ archive about her that said she designed the first use of projection for a large-scale Australian show. I'm like, what? Like, I'm halfway through my PhD in looking at digital scenography, and here's this woman I've never heard of before. And I'm like, what is going on? And so I finally had a chance this year to do a dive. I looked at archives and newspaper articles and birth and death certificates and all these things, and managed to pull together a bit of a story about her work on, it was the Magic Flute for the Elizabethan Theatre Trust or Opera Trust, whatever it was, before it became Opera Australia. And so pulled together and found the holy grail of newspaper clips where she's holding one of these hand-painted glass slides that she used to project onto this work. I cried when I found this image because I'm like, this is a story that I felt like as a woman, as someone working in this area, I felt really connected to, but also shocked. I'm like, how many other little stories are out there that we haven't, you know, we're all really busy people, but like we haven't had time to share. So the Australian sort of those stories, I think that's going to be the next phase for me, is thinking about how we capture those and celebrate those and share those. And then, sorry, apologies. I'll paint the whole picture. Completely opposite to that, almost kind of. I'm also looking at artificial intelligence and performance design. So I'm doing some work, some research at the moment, which is practice-led research with some colleagues from QUT, looking at how we can co-create projection design with artificial intelligence, and kind of the amazing, the unpredictability, the chance that comes into that, how AI as a collaborator is both sometimes deeply unethical, but also surprising. And so I'm heading off in a week to present on that at a conference, which will be, that's one of those things where it is interesting, but it's also like AI is sexy at the moment. So we're like, let's look at AI in scenography and sort of target that sort of space. And then the other thing, the last thing I say is that during my PhD, it exposed me to a lot of different ways of doing research, lots of different methodologies, whether that's practice-led or whether you're talking to people, whether you're surveying audiences, whether you're working with numbers or creative work or spoken word. And that has proved very powerful for me to collaborate with people because I'm good at designing research. And so I think I'll come back to that later in terms of like advice to people or for people who are thinking about PhDs, because it has made me able to move across lots of different forms of research.
Amazing. Thanks, Tessa. That's huge. And actually, I just want to take a moment to say that you handed in your PhD.
I haven't told Maddie this either. I submitted my PhD last night.
So she's here after submitting her PhD last night, which is amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
And I don't know how to explain how intense that is because it's such a big body of work that you've been working on for many years, and to actually just hand it in is the weirdest, strangest feeling in the world because it's consumed your life for so long. So I totally feel that. So well done. And yeah, might talk a bit more about that honours PhD process towards the end.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, this is a good forum to share that news.
See? Yeah, it's good. All right, Penny. Tell us a little bit about what you're currently working on in research.
I just want to pick up on something really quickly, and it was the thing that actually was the original spark for me to want to do research, and that is that we have a massive gap, as you are all aware, between what we have done in industry and what we have in research in sonography. And for me, it is we have a really limited amount of information that exists within the literature of what people have done, when people have done it, and how they have done it. It's really limited. So we know all about certain moments in time, but there's a lot that we just don't know about, like this woman who we should all be celebrating.
Yeah.
So that was actually my first moment when I kind of, and the spark was actually lit many years ago when I was actually similar to Maddie. I was very fortunate. I was when I was very young, in the early 2000s, I was a resident trainee designer at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I was there for a year, and at that time, we were identifying the gap of going, we know at the Royal Shakespeare Company that nobody is actually documenting the designs.
Oh.
Okay. And if that is the Royal Shakespeare Company, what does that mean for the rest of us? Okay. Yeah. That was my mentor and I talking 20 years ago. Okay. So at this point of time in my life, I've come back to Australia because I am Australian and this is where I belong. And these are the stories I want to work with because these are the stories of my heritage. And I feel now that, and I mean, my research direction is not necessarily about how do we capture what we're doing and how we're doing it. But at the moment, my personal research is, well, actually, as I was saying before, my personal practice needs to shift. So we were trained in an environment coming off, basically, I kind of feel that up until the 1980s, there was a certain amount of respect for materiality in the industry. And we forget that the way we practice theatre is actually a relatively new thing still. The way we understand it is so largely based on Wagnerian expectation. And then through the 1980s, there's a big explosion in the wastefulness of how we create. And I'm a product of that as a designer. And so I hadn't really given that process a huge amount of thought. And then I met Tanya, whose extraordinary book about ecosonography has completely changed the way I think about how I make my work. And this in Australia, we are at a tipping point, and this is something Tanya's much more qualified than I am to talk about because I'm a bit like her disciple. This is true. We are at a tipping point, and Australia has been really, really, really behind, and there's many, many, many reasons for this. It's not because there's not the will amongst artists to make change, but the point is that we need to make change. We need to do it now. I'm in the process of most of my work is highly, I'd say quite commercial. It is not, sometimes I do make work, not often, but that does come from an eco-narrative, but that's the exception to the rule for me. And I'm often working within complex systems where I'm dealing with many stakeholders who have needs, wants, desires, and particularly in the current economic climate have been really shaped around, for example, building costs. They've gone through the roof. If you're a set designer and you're trying to build something right now, it is far more expensive than it ever has been. Budgets have not gone up. Material availability has changed. So there's kind of been this perfect storm. Then we've had COVID. And then we've had years of very mixed arts policy in Australia. So the perfect storm out of that for many people has been to just try and keep treading water as a designer. But we can no longer do that. Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Designer fees have not gone up. 100%.
Everything else is reflecting inflation, but
right. So the big question is, how does it come? So how for people like me, so my most recent work, which is what I'm actually doing my research, part of my research at the moment is I just designed a production called Pride and Prejudice. You may have seen it in your social medias advertised in Fiverr. If you're in Brisbane, it'll be coming to Melbourne early next year. Perth, you'll be getting it mid next year. Anyone from overseas, it's potentially going to the UK next year. And so this is a really commercial production. It had to have high commercial stakes. So the big challenge for my builder and I was, how do we take this, which is in no way, shape or form designed to be something that's a green project, and make it as green as we can. So that is the bit that I'm interested in, of how do we collaboratively work together to find wins so that we can demonstrate that you can do this commercially, that it doesn't have to be an aesthetic sort of, people associate green set design with a poor aesthetic. No, wrong. People associate green.
And we'll end the session there.
People associate green set design with being more expensive. Also wrong. Mm-hmm. People associate green set design with something that is really hard to achieve. Also wrong. So these are the assumptions that we have to challenge. And through doing this research, it's really helping me go, well, actually, what are the processes that I can take on board? Yes, absolutely, Imogen, sustainability, rehoming, circularity. Yes, yes, yes. Everyone read what Imogen said here. Preach, 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 preach.
Yeah.
Imogen also, I'm a disciple of Imogen as well. These amazing women who are doing incredible things in this space. Yeah, there's a lot going on in this space at the moment. I'm very, very lucky to start my research journey with Tanya and people like Imogen in this space, because we do have to transition our industry to a better future. I'm going to hand back.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Thanks, Penny. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. I'm gonna go straight to Maddie now. And about Maddie, what are you working on at the moment?
I want to I'm going to share that, but I just want to kind of address something that Penny raised about kind of the mid-80s, the kind of the attitudes changing, because this was something that kind of I talked about in my honours research, and to kind of share some history with everybody here, because I think it's really interesting that you noted it at that point, Penny, is effectively in the mid-80s, particularly if we're thinking about costume, the tariffs on Australian clothing started to be dismantled. Up until that point, we had a huge amount of kind of import regulation on clothing and textiles, And that the Button report, which kind of came out in the mid-80s, decided that they were going to dismantle those, and they've been progressively dismantled over the kind of following 20 or 30 years. And so it was that point in which people started to offshore production of clothing in Australia. The cost of clothing went down compared to the cost of textiles. And so that's why we have this kind of like cost change, attitude change that kind of is marked from that point. And you can kind of mark the end of the tariffs being dismantled. So we had 5% up until I think it was kind of 2013 or 14, maybe 15, because that's when Uniqlo and H&M and Zara all entered the Australian market. So this is kind of like that mass, like those kind of controls kind of, and that legacy of that we're still dealing with, but that's the kind of reason we have this kind of attitude around, particularly that like in terms of overconsumption and kind of wastefulness for clothing in Australia that kind of happens from that point in time. And my research was really on looking at honours was really about like the people impact or kind of the employment impact, not really the environmental impact, but there's losses on both areas, right? It's all connected. In terms of like projects that I'm looking at currently, it's about, I'm looking at a couple of different things. So I'm doing a lot of costume research. I'm turning my PhD into a book at the moment, which is very exciting. So kind of turning those ideas around emotional intelligence in costume work into a book that's going to be published by Routledge sometime at the start of next year. But looking at the future, I've got a project that's really exciting that's coming up. So in the start of the year, I was awarded a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowship, which is basically a big pot of money funded by the European Union to kind of fund research projects for people coming from Australia or wherever around the world and be based in Europe at an institution there for 1 or 2 years. So I'm taking the family and we're heading over to Helsinki, to Aalto University in Finland for a year for 2025, which is going to be looking at how costume folk are using digital Industry 4.0 technologies, particularly digital pattern making and digital printing or 3D printing, to kind of advance their practice, or how they're implementing that in their practice. And again, because I'm a reactionary, this project was sparked by a talk at PQ when we were PQ 23, which basically there was a kind of some people who were doing an EU funded project called the Canon Project, which looked at how kind of sharing how you teach technology in theatre, presented their work, and it was a great panel, kind of like 7 different institutions from all around Europe kind of sharing their pedagogical practice for 3 years. And the problem I had with that was there was no mention of costume at all in the panel, and there was no mention of costume there was kind of 2 mentions of costume in their 1,000-page book, which I searched during the talk. And it was always in conjunction with set and costumes. It wasn't like a costume itself. And so kind of looking at how costume is marginalized in conversations of technology, and that's, I think, really a gendered thing, and because of that gendering, then what does that talk about, like how does that influence the investment we put into these works and these people who are doing this work? Because if a lighting person says I need a new lighting board, the company will complain, but they'll fund a new lighting board. Whereas if a costume person says, we need to pay $5,000 for this new piece of technology, it's probably going to be a hard no. So kind of, I think there's some pieces of work to do around that, which I'm going to be going and doing.
That sounds amazing, Maddie. And and you actually articulated that research gap so beautifully as well, in terms of the kind of the necessity of doing that research, and how exciting. And you get to do a year, right? It's a really prestigious scholarship. They don't give that many of them away. It's a European funded scholarship. So we don't often, as Australians, get those, a lot of chances to dip into the kind of EU funds, and EU research funding is just so much greater than what we have here. We can't even start to compare it. But yeah, so having an opportunity for an Australian to go over and spend a year just doing research, right? You just get to deep dive for a year.
Deep dive in a whole year. And I could have gone for 2 years.
Experts in the world.
If I could have gone to Finland for 2 years, I could have gone for 2 years, but I'm going to just go one.
Yeah, I know.
Cold. But yeah, so the project is 1 year, but the funding goes for up to 2 years, and I'm very happy to share my experiences on that funding journey as well, and kind of my, because there's funding from the EU to do postdocs, there's funding to do also
there is, yeah.
So there's lots of kind of places to go if people are interested in kind of taking their research overseas.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we don't even know that those opportunities exist.
Yeah, right.
So it's really important to talk about them and know that they exist, and that that there are opportunities.
Yeah, I often only hear about them when friends get them. Yeah, I'm like, I feel like I heard about this once, maybe on TV, but when it's happening to people around you, you got to see it to be it, right?
Yeah,
and so
I really thank you so much about talking a bit about your research. And I think one of the things that I took from what all of you were talking about was that new knowledge often comes from the intersection across fields, right? So when we have performance design or scenography and AI, that's when we see about how they interrelate. The new knowledge comes from that. The mix of technical theatre and sustainability. New technology and costume, like that's where new knowledge is created. And I think it's incredibly important in terms of pushing our field forward, not only in research, but also in practice.
Yeah.
And I think
as Chris says, there's so many gaps.
Yeah. So
like it's a very rich time to be thinking of doing research, because you can throw kind of a dart anywhere and you'll find very like fleshy, sexy kind of gaps to talk about.
And I think, look, we've had in the last 10 years, I think we've had this like real escalation in research in our field, and it's so new still, and there's so much work to be done, as we've all articulated in many ways, not only in terms of new ways of thinking about what we do because of the climate crisis, because of the way AI and new technology is intersecting with our lives, but also because I suppose more and more we're going to need to know we're going to need to know what we need, where we're going in this field. And also we also need to understand in many ways what's come before us. Because I think that you were saying that discovering that amazing designer who had been lost in our conversations, and a woman designer using new technology is really, and that's why you kind of cried in that moment. It's like, oh my God.
And she's so happy.
How is she lost?
She's so happy holding this little slide, and I just cried. I'd also just fallen in love with her a little bit through doing this. But I think, we often in, all types of performance, like we really do love telling stories. And I know it might sound a little cliche, but like, I do think that's how I think about research, is like, what's the story that needs to be told, whether it's like, here's a massive problem that we need to talk about, or here's someone's experience that hasn't been shared before, and how do we sort of like get their voice out there or help them tell their story, or people who have left us and we can still capture little bits. But that idea of, I like to think of it that way, because it can make it more when the peer review feedback comes through, or the deadlines pass, or etc. It's nice to have a more kind of meaningful thing to latch onto with it.
If
that makes any sense.
So my next question, I just want to throw to one person to pick up. And my next question is, what do you think is the benefit of research in scenography? I think I might ask Tess this one.
Sure. Oh, this is like the one that was the hardest for me to think about.
It was hard. I know.
But like, okay. So when I was thinking about this question, because we did get the questions in advance. Thank you, Tanya. The first thing that came to mind really broadly was because I've seen more people across lots of different fields pick up the language of performance design or the language of scenography and use it to help them to understand lots of things. Like people talk about the scenography of cities, like, you know, there's all these areas of expanded scenography, which is, you know, like people who are looking at scenography of the kitchen and domestic spaces and everyone, and this is not my area, but and this is why I wish Angela was here, but like creative placemaking or the work, I don't know if Naviana's online, but looking at people who are working in, not in the theatre discipline, but in the design or the architecture disciplines, who are using that language of performance environments, of manipulation, orchestration to understand how people be in space or move through space and time. I think it's really cool because it's kind of like theatre design's kind of trying to take over the world a little bit because like the language that we're developing is really helpful for architects or for visual artists or for people in other areas. And so I think that's really cool. And I think, yeah, the benefit probably goes to some of the things we've been talking about and even like what Chris says there in terms of all the gaps. The benefit of doing it is we are capturing the ways people do what they do. We're celebrating how people do what they do. We're telling stories where, you know, just by multiplying the output or the people who are doing it, like, you know, where this is so much of this stuff is not new, right? Like even like a lot of the things I look at is around technology. And so one of the things I often come across is people thinking about it as like new media or new ways or new tools. And I'm like, oh, I hate to tell you, like they've been playing with projection for hundreds of years. Like, and it's also just another tool, another way of creating illusion and magic in theatre. And so I think sometimes that that knowledge of what's come before of it can make you such a like a grounded and informed designer or person working in the field, like because you can feel connected to the people who came before you. And if we can't sort of tell stories or have that out there and accessible, and not all academic writing is accessible. Right. That's a whole another issue. But I think that's one of the benefits in particular.
Can I pick up on that?
Because please save me.
No. That for me is actually the true value, because I think this interesting sort of time that we're in, where scenography has become a new word that we use in white, Western, non-European context. So it really means, so scenography as a term obviously has a history in Europe, and the way it's used in Australia is a very new way in which we use it. I think particularly if you look at the practice history in America and Australia and in England, so much, and it was certainly my experience of that mentorship is actually the process of transfer of knowledge historically in our industry, and the way in which our industry has changed and shifted in the last 20 years is such that the nature of mentorship has also changed. And I feel that what's really important about capturing that transfer of knowledge is that it actually opens it out beyond two people in a rehearsal room. And that's really vital. So for me, that's one of the really important values of it. And a lot of dinosaurs are a bit scared of that because they see it as impinging on their grounds. It's not. You know, it's actually just opening the world up a little bit. So some of the secrets are not just secrets anymore. It's like, you know, it's a bit like when you have a tradesman and you go, well, you can't use my drill because you don't know how to use it. And I'm not going to teach you because you're not a tradie. It's a little bit like that. It's in terms of how we hold knowledge in our industry. And I feel that it's good to just open it up.
Maddie, I've got another question that Thanks so much, Penny and Tess. I've just got to open up another question, which sort of relates to this one, which is about the potential tensions between academia and practice, and which we definitely feel a kind of tension more broadly, not just as performance designers, but also there's this tension between academia and practice. And How do you think we can start to dispel some of those tensions, or do you think those tensions are real? Do you know?
God, yes.
And why, why do they exist? I mean, these are bigger questions, but what are the kind of ways in which we might start to kind of dispel some of those, I suppose, restrictions, or what do you call it? Those, barriers to having, because all I can say, look, just to preface that question around tensions between academia and practice, I lived in the UK for 2 years when I was doing my PhD, and I felt my experience was that there wasn't such a big gap between academia and practice, and that actually there were a lot of artists who did their PhDs and were still practicing and not actually academics. They'd done their PhD for themselves, for their own practice, and gone back into practice, or actually never went out of practice, just used the PhD as a way of better understanding their work and communicating their work. And so it's not necessarily you do a PhD and then you end up in academia. That's what I've noticed from my UK colleagues. So I think I feel like it's very much an Australian thing, but I'm sure there's other areas in the world that also feel this way. Yeah, what's your thoughts, Maddie?
Look, I'm gonna answer. I agree, and I wonder if it's partly because of the number of people, so there is that kind of ivory tower isolation thing, and as the numbers increase, that tension will dispel. But I'll kind of answer this question with a story. So I wrote a paper when I was doing my PhD that was kind of completely by the way, but I kind of had this kind of very kind of powerful urge to write it, effectively looking at how the tension, which is similar kind of to this, I guess, in many ways, between creatives and technical staffs in theatre, like the backstage kind of crew and the kind of designers and artists on the stage, and really talking to how that kind of that kind of tension is perpetuated through the behaviors of kind of both groups, and this kind of othering that happens and kind of like builds up that kind of tension, and kind of how that's kind of serves and doesn't serve the works we make together. And I wrote this paper and I was really proud of it, and got published in a kind of an academic journal, and that was great. And then I decided I needed to publish it broadly to the kind of arts community. And so I sent in a version to Arts Hub, and they loved it and kind of wanted to publish that. The nervousness I felt about publishing that work to the broad industry compared to the nervousness I felt about publishing that work to the kind of academic group.
Wow, I understand that.
Because the kind of sending it out into the kind of industry, where I knew like 3,000 or 4,000 people read that versus, maybe 2 to 10 people.
I read it.
So, like,
Please read it.
the stakes were so much higher, and the kind of message was so much more pertinent, because it wasn't then an academic exercise anymore. It was going into kind of people's lives, and it was becoming, a kind of a discussion point in staff meetings at theatre companies and things like that. So it was kind of really shining a light on something that we don't really want to talk about. We don't talk about enough or often or ever. And so, and the feedback I got was generally positive, but there was some criticism as well from the industry, and so there's definitely, I think, the risk thing is part of it. And I also think there's something about the kind of position of authority that comes with kind of working as a researcher in this space, that others might feel that their experience is invalidated because of the just power hierarchies. And I'm acutely, because of what my research looks at, I'm acutely conscious of power hierarchies. And so I think there's some kind of people, as Penny mentioned, who has stakes in the status quo, so they don't want things to change, so they don't want to kind of take on this on board. There's other people who feel like, you know, it might not go far enough, or it kind of isn't focusing on the right thing, so like, you know, it's not affecting their lived experience. So there's kind of that sort of stuff as well. So there's a lot of challenges in that. But I have to say, I really recommend, if you're doing research, Arts Hub is kind of like a forum, because they have, you know, Richard Watts there is keen to publish this sort of work. So, you know, sharing that in that forum is really productive. But yeah, I was like doing that.
Yeah, like the conversation as well. Like you're challenging me, Maddie, because I have some work I did looking at the skills shortage of theatre workers in Queensland, Southeast Queensland. That, you know, and I've been wanting to put it in the conversation because I think that it would be of interest, but I'm also nervous about, you know, people looking at that. And I think it actually, do you mind if I respond to that? It actually ties into what Chris said there, this idea artists go back to study because of precarity in their jobs, as if you people who research didn't make it.
Oh, that's to the point.
Oh my God, Chris, you're like cutting right to the heart.
Right, I love it. It's so like,
it's the same with education, hey?
Yeah,
like I remember I cannot forget this at an open day, like 5 or 6 years ago. I had a parent who asked me, "Do you do this just because you couldn't get a job?" Because it, like, you know, they're asking probably because of out of concern for their young person who wants to go work in live performance. And like, I didn't let on how deeply that wounded me.
Oh my God.
But like that, there's definitely like, and as I started finding out how much I loved this side of my job, I do sometimes struggle to really kind of talk about it with other people, because I think there's a little bit in me that's like, oh, they won't really care about this, or they'll just, you know, oh, I'm just a nerd or something like that. And so I think, like, I've been trying to challenge that myself the past couple of years by thinking about trying to remind myself of the value in the things that I'm looking at, in how it can be, how other people might find it interesting as well. And so, like, and how, again, I'm very lucky, I get paid to do research. So how can I take advantage of that and capture stories or share things or etc. So for me, I often am not coming at it as I'm researching my own practice, but I'm researching others' work. And so how can I tell their stories and share what they do and celebrate what they do? Because they don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
They're making theatre.
Yeah, exactly.
They're making stuff happen. And then also at the same time, trying to be very careful to not become the vampire academic or researcher who swoops in and goes, I'm going to publish a paper out of everything you've done, and then leaves. And the people who are actually doing the work don't get any recognition. And so for me, often it's like, so I've done some research like with companies, like with Dead Puppet Society. And so I had the AD of that company was a co-author on a paper. He read one draft, I think, but it was the creative practice was their outcome. And so finding ways of kind of like quite literally bringing practitioners and industry into the research and making sure it's kind of quid pro quo in that case. Can't even say it right. But
Yeah, no, I think Chris really got it to the heart. It was like I always want to take that quote and just go, okay, great. I think just sort of, I realise we want to have enough time for discussion with everybody online. I suppose there's maybe a couple of, I wonder whether we might skip a couple of questions and then see if we got any questions from the audience, and then we can always come back to it.
Yeah, for sure.
One that I do think is important for that we said that we would highlight is advice for anyone who's interested in doing an honours or PhD project. So there might be people online that are going, might be interested in doing an honours or PhD, or I'm interested in research. What would I do? Where would I start? Any words of wisdom and recommendation? Anyone want to start with that one?
Penny, what do you wish you'd been told?
Oh gosh. I think follow your gut. You've got to do something that's meaningful to you. You absolutely have to find something that you're going to be passionate about, because if it's not something that you're going to want to do every day, then you're wasting your time. I think that would be for me the first thing. Just start reading. Read all the time. Read and read some more. Actually, I wish I had set up a better note-taking system when I first started. Get yourself a really good Excel spreadsheet. Absolute must. Did not do that when I first started reading. Wish I had. I don't think I've really got much good advice. I'm handing over to
I was just going to say on that, just in the context of Penny. No. Penny, just in the context of where Penny's at. Actually, I might just might help kind of like expand on what Penny's talking about a little bit. Because Penny, and the way that it worked from Penny into honours at the moment is we had a research project last year with NIDA, with Imogen, who's on this call at the moment, where we were working with NIDA to green their curriculum and create resources for their teaching staff. And that project required a few research assistants to come on board, and we were very passionate about getting some research assistants that were from industry, who were really currently involved in practice, who had an interest in sustainability. And Penny had actually worked with Linda, who's part of the co-director of the Linda's part of the Performance and Ecology Research Lab. She's one of the co-directors. But yeah, so she was also part of the project, and Linda and Penny had worked together on a project that was an eco project, actually. So that's
one of the few that I was talking about before. This is the one. Yeah.
And so we invited Penny to come on board as a research assistant, and then Penny got very excited about research. Once she was doing it, and then, oh my God, I love research.
I love reading. Why haven't I not been doing this?
Why have I not been doing it? So it was a good little kind of, I think sometimes those research assistant gigs are really helpful in just kind of navigating, is research for me? And then you wanted to keep going. That's really it after we kind of handed over the resources to NIDA. So then we there's just in terms of pathways, for example, I can only speak for my university. We, at the Queensland College of Art and Design, we have an honours into PhD pathway. That's the kind of typical pathway, unless you've done an honours within the last 5 to 10 years. We kind of recommend an honours project first. It's the easiest way to get a PhD scholarship. It's a 1 year, do what makes you happy project, and you write a thesis. So Penny's in her honours right now, and she's in the second part of her honours. She'll finish up at the end of October. And she's looking into she's continuing her work looking at sustainable practice in her own practice. And thinking of strategies to kind of pursue sustainability in commercial theatre.
I think for me the big thing is and this is actually interesting because where I began with my research project, where I'm at now, completely different places. I came in thinking I'd do one thing, which is completely different to what I'm doing right now. I think for me, the important thing is I'm at a point in my life where I want to give back to my industry. I'm 47. For me, it feels like a good time to do that. And I could see that one way I can give back is by helping my industry and in what it needs to transition. And interesting, the thing that came out of it was working on the research project for NIDA. The big gap that I could see that was really needed for Australian designers in Australian context was a materials data resource kit. And I thought that's what I'd be making this year. That's not what I've ended up doing for many reasons. It's still something I really want to do because I think it's something that's really needed, and it's a rapidly changing space. But importantly, none of the data that is international is necessarily relevant for our industry. So doing carbon calculations on set construction is not apples for apples when we're using data that comes internationally. So we've got a certain amount of data that's available locally to start doing those calculations. We have certain methodologies and tools that we can use that are available. There are some really amazing ones that have come out from all different places from around the world, as well as Australia, specifically the UK Theatre Green Book. But how they work in the Australian context and are useful for Australian practitioners is specifically where the intersection of my work sits, and how can I help people like me, who feels a little bit like a dinosaur now in my industry. It's not the young people. We realised young people have a passion and a willingness to do this. So the graduates of NIDA are going to be the people who are the change makers of tomorrow. The issue that we have right now are the dinosaurs in the industry who have to change their practices, and they've got to change them fast. So for me, and I suspect this will be where my research goes forward, is how do we help that particular sector? So I'm looking at production specifically in set construction. How do we help shifting those dinosaurs into better practices in our industry? So that's where I don't know what that will look like, but I think it's somewhere in there.
Yeah, the idea that it evolved. Your idea evolved.
Yeah,
exactly.
you think you're going to come doing one thing and you end up doing another. That happens all the time.
I still don't know what my research question is actually called. Tess and I were just laughing before we started going.
I can't remember mine.
Her research question. She's just finished a 3-year PhD and she can't remember her research question.
3 years. Oh, please. Oh, that's generous.
Yeah. And I've just spent 6 months writing and I still can't remember what my research question is because it's changing every week.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the whole point. Yeah.
I was just Tess and Nadia are at QUT, so I thought maybe you talk a bit about like the pathway there.
Yeah, sure.
Those, and we can only speak from our own institutions.
And I saw Simone's comment there. Sorry, Simone, I think if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. But also maybe it also goes back to something previous I saw in the chat around the importance of regional voices and regional stories as well.
Yeah.
And I think one of the beautiful things we have now, post-COVID, still in universities is a flexibility to engage online and the ability to kind of like have sessions like this as well. Like I can't tell you exactly, okay, so with master's work, even with a PhD work, one of my supervisors is in the UK. And so like that's another tip. There's a tip for you. If you want someone who's really cool, who's like at the top of their game, and you want them to be attached to your work, you can ask them to be an external supervisor. So I approached Jocelyn McKinney in 2019 and asked her. She terrified the pants off me, but she's quite lovely, and so she's my external supervisor. But so I think with QT, for example, sometimes when you start, there's often, the intro unit that might tell you, here's how to do research. Here's how to use the library systems. Here's all the ology words, epistemology, methodology, all those things. And so there's often like one unit or one course you have to take that gets you onboarded for that. And then if you're doing a master's by research, it's a lot of it, and this can be the problem, right? A lot of it you're on your own. And so the ability to be able to do that remotely is really, really common and much more doable these days. And so I think if you're thinking about it in particular, I'd be thinking about and asking questions in terms of okay, well, I'm not leaving Cairns. I'm staying where I am because this is where I am, and I'm not this is me, these are my stories. And so how can you, university, make this work? And universities want HDR students. They want high degree research students. And so there's always minutiae around how you navigate what's called your candidature. But if you have an idea, universities and people Tanya, myself, Maddie, Tanya's doing this with Penny. I hope to start supervising as well soon, from next year, because we really care about kind of supporting people who love what we do. And so if there's someone even in this network that you're interested in this idea, send us an email, because often for me, I know with my supervisors, it started with the people. I found the people I wanted, regardless of what institution they're at. Maddie did the same thing, I would say, as well. Like,
I think it's the people. It's the right. You've got to find the right
people.
supervisor. For
Yeah,
you.
and I think, is Sue online? Maybe she is. I think I might. Okay.
Oh, I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to have Sue Osmond from NIDA as kind of my external person.
Yeah, it's about it's actually about your supervisor.
Yeah.
And that really depends also on the topic that you want to explore.
Yeah.
And your vibe with the supervisor.
Yeah, and so I think it's a beautiful thing, not to toot our own horn, but conversations like this, right? Because like we can, you know, there are multiple people who are attending, the multiple people who are talking, who could literally be your supervisor to help you on your research journey.
It's like Tanya here. So Tanya actually supervises PhDs from all over the world because she's acknowledged as the global leader in what she does. So where you've got PhDs from where at the moment?
Finland.
Yeah.
And the UK at the moment. Yeah.
And so like it's like that people side of it. So I think like, and it can be, there's so many reasons though why you might choose somewhere to go. It might be because you prefer in-person learning and so you want to do, but the beauty of it's like maybe the takeaway, the advice is about that network building and you may decide that's the thing, you could choose a supervisor, a principal supervisor who's not an expert in what you do. Mine's not. She comes from a dance psychology background, but she's excellent at project management, very experienced supervisor, and really good at I did some like qualitative and quantitative data analysis, like actual number crunching, and she helped guide me through that. And then I have other people who bring that actual discipline specific knowledge to what I did. And so, but you can find, you will always be the expert at what you want to look at, and you build little teams around you who can support you through that. And so, but yeah, I think the pro would be like, if you're passionate about it, my only advice was like, don't hide it. If you're really passionate about thinking about research, don't hide it. Resist the urge to think that you're only doing it because you can't practice anymore or whatever, you know, like, because if you love it, if you're really interested in it, then trust that feeling and maybe play around with thinking about people you want to help guide you through that experience. Yeah.
And the other thing is it's worth knowing is that for PhDs, there are scholarships available, particularly Australian scholarships for Australian residents and citizens, and if you have a good, this is why often the honours to PhD pathway is the standard pathway, because the honours project gets you the mark. So you've got to do a one year project that essentially gives you the marks to be able to get the scholarship. It can be harder if you've been in practice for 20 years or 15 years to then, sometimes it's possible, but honestly that is often the best pathway.
Or you bypass that, do masters.
Yes.
And then you do 1 year of masters.
That's
and then
right.
At the end of masters, you can do what's called articulate. And so you do a year of masters and you go, actually, I've got a 3-year project here, not a 2-year project. I'm going to articulate, and then you go into a PhD.
Yeah.
So,
But then the scholarship pathways might be a bit
trickier,
depending on what institution you're at. So, just because sometimes people don't know that you can get scholarships for PhDs and it's a decent amount of money. I would say now with the cost of living crisis, you know, it's probably used to be enough to live off. I don't know if it is anymore. And I also, when I started my PhD research in 2011, there were no there were no performance design, academics, supervisor options.
It's like Chris is saying there's no one. There was no one who's good at it. There was no expert. Yeah.
I remember going to BC because I was living in Melbourne back then. I went to BCA and I looked around, and like they said, we've got no one from, I suppose, from their production department that could do it. And then when I went to theatre and I said, look, I want to do it on sustainability, they were like, we don't know anybody who understands anything about sustainability, so we don't know how to advise you on that. So I thought, oh, that was great. So then I went to architecture, and I mean, like, I do not have an architecture background. At that point, I had no real connection to architecture, but I had worked as an exhibition designer at the Melbourne Museum and had been working alongside interior designers or people who've done interior design and also architecture as their degrees going into exhibition. And I had a small network of colleagues in that space. So then I went to architecture, said I want to do performance design and sustainability, and they went, great, sounds good. And my PhD supervisor was a sustainability expert that knew nothing about theatre, but she was perfect from a sustainability expert side. And then I had another supervisor in theatre, but I really had to reach out to international researchers and academics to kind of, I guess, get the knowledge that I didn't have and get the community that I didn't have in Australia. And now we actually have quite a few people who have PhDs that are able to supervise. I mean, I still say it's a small number, but
no,
yeah.
it is.
But it is.
But
There was nobody.
The problem is it just
was
takes a
nobody.
long time to grow.
Yeah,
Because it's a long process, and then et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, they don't. And even once you get it, you can't actually outright supervise. You've got to assistant. So I suppose the takeaway is you'll always be you will always be the expert on your area. You'll sit at the intersection of your supervisor's expertise, and you take from them and you bring it on board. And then, you know, you do get to choose that, you know, what you focus on. Yeah, and as Chris said, supervisor is not God.
Your supervisor is not God.
And I, you know, I had a change of supervision through my journey. I think it's a common thing that some other people have had as well. And so, you know, yeah. Oh, and Navina is there. Hello. I was wondering if you were there. Was it saying network is incredibly important? Sorry. Yep. Yeah.
Oh, right, Imogen.
Yeah.
Imogen, are you saying you met the same thing in 2005, applied to 4 universities? Yeah, right.
And can we just say, I love your book, Imogen?
Yeah, talking about telling stories. Hey?
Yeah. We've only got about 10 minutes left, and I know the chat has been quite active with people putting things in the chat, but I just wanted to open up to anybody who wants to say anything, ask any questions.
I can remove the spotlight if that helps.
Respond. There we are. We can see people now. It's exciting.
I think maybe while people are chatting, I know that like we're talking before about that real regional perspective as well. And like in Australia, so much of like even I'm conscious like the 3 sessions that we've had, everyone has been joining from a major metropolitan centre.
That's true.
Right? Yeah. So we've had people from Melbourne, from Perth, from Sydney, and now from Brisbane.
Oh, that's
and not to speak to everyone's individual story about where they've come from. Like I think we'll talk about Bundaberg at some point, etc. But I think it's one thing that I'll just maybe as with my ScenoLab hat on, we're really conscious that these kinds of sessions are aiming to help start a conversation with a few voices in the beginning and then kind of, you know, go from there. And so yeah, cans represent. Cans represent. And so, and like, you know, the beauty, the joys, the challenges, you know, they are similar, but also oh so different as well, coming from those different sort of places around this enormous continent that we call, you know, Australia. And so I think that there's anything, maybe I'm saying this from a ScenoLab perspective, there's anything we can do in that sense, whether it's, having more talks, having a talk about regional practice, regional research, regional perspectives. And so I think that's really exciting. Yeah. I was hoping, oh yes, no, it's good. Imogen, I was hoping by vamping, someone would ask a question.
I just suddenly thought, you know, the talk about regions and more and more theatre makers, performance makers and scenographers are moving out of the cities, even though the bulk of our work is often in the city, but often because our pay scales are not moving at the same rate as, you know, the cost of living is moving. I know so many performance makers now who are not living in cities. And I'm just thinking there's sort of an interesting intersection with the notions of expanded scenography and, you know, storytelling outside, you know, and bringing communities in and placemaking. And I can see that there could be some really interesting research avenues and intersections for scenographers in terms of regional placemaking, expanded scenography, community uptake, and new forms of storytelling, you know, and maybe we could even throw AI in there as well. Why not? The internet is everywhere.
Angela would have been perfect for that image
Yeah.
because that is
Yeah.
exactly what she's doing.
Yeah, we have this little gap where
Angela's the placemaking, expanded sonography, regional gap is yes.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's incredibly sad is that places like the University of New England and Bathurst CSU have both recently shut down pretty much their practice-driven theatre departments due to funding, and the university's not considering them economically viable. Like, they cost more money than the university feels that they get kickback from. So and I think that's also interesting. I think it's because there hasn't been a great deal of international research coming out of theatre studies and sonography until now. And so universities haven't recognised their kickback in terms of kudos of being institutions that have generated these great sort of world-renowned thinkers. And so the regional universities have really struggled to maintain their performance practices, and yet some of the most amazing performance makers in Australia have come out of those regional universities, and they're not the main cities, because they've been allowed to practice and develop their work, you know, in these very supported bubbles where it's been easier to live and connections have been stronger. So I think that's also another very interesting area of
and I think it's interesting, Imogen, you talk about like I was kind of talking to Penny about this before. There is a game to play by like working as in a university, like whether that's from an educational perspective, whether it's from a research perspective. We play certain games around what our universities value, whether it's Q1,
Yes,
like Q1
right.
journal applications, whether it's, you know, like incredible ARC, you know, grants, which Tanya, I'll, you know, let her share about. But like, you know, there are certain things that we know about our different institutions, what they value, and you've got to hang on to your soul
Yes,
as you play the game. And sometimes, you know, but there's different opinions on it. I'm navigating it myself in terms of my university's focus on commercializing research. And I'm like, what? I'm like,
yes,
what?
that's what
What does that even mean? And so, but I think I'm trying to take a pragmatic approach over the past, you know, in a post-COVID, I'm trying to be more of a pragmatist and go, okay, so what does the university value? And how can I team up with people to play that game?
Yeah.
Whether it's teaming up with people who are smarter than me for grant applications, or me bringing people on board so we can target the Q1 journals, so we can get those things that the university values.
Yeah.
So we can kind of like kill two birds, still do what we love, but get some runs on the board that the university goes, oh, you're a real thing. Like you're real. And so I think maybe that, like, some of us have been playing the game for longer and some of us who are very new to it. And so I think maybe it's kind of like by having some of these conversations, we can partner up, we can co-publish, we can apply for grants together, we can do those things that kind of get the different universities or practitioners who want to put a toe into research in a university. Like, sorry, I'm trying not to sound like a cynic, but I think like there's a little like I think maybe I'm just trying to find that pragmatic line there.
I think it's really important what you're saying in that, you know, we have to remember we are a tiny cohort, you know. There are so many people in the world that do what we do, and if we do not care and support each other as artists, then what are we doing, you know? And that means like cross-organisationally, that means across industry. It's just got to be how we behave in practice, and that's not how universities might behave, and that might not be how a lot of organisations behave, but it's how we should behave.
Yeah. And I think, like, so Chris has made this point in terms of lots of ways we can commercialise, like we're taking systems out into industry that's commercializing things. And so I am still trying to see what I do from, like, sometimes you've got to kind of like try to pull back and look at what it is you do, and not just go, oh, I'm doing what I do. This is what I do. I get it done. Like theatre, Australian theatre makers, maybe there's a certain pragmatism about it, like get the job done, and think and pull back and go, oh, actually, this is really incredible what I'm doing here, or what our students are doing, or so. And think about it in those terms, not as like gross ways, like we're going to commercialize everything, but actually, as Chris has suggested, we may already be playing in those spaces. And so allowing us to see ourselves as what we do as worth funding, as worth money, as worth support, as worth industry engagement.
Yeah, makes sense. I think that's important.
Yeah.
I think we're just coming up to the end now. So this is the end of our series. Do you want to say some closing words? This is the end of today's session, but it is also the end of the series. So maybe just a few words from you, Tess, and moving forward with ScenoLab.
Yeah, sure. So I think like I have the privilege of being able to wrap up these sessions, but you know, the 3 sessions wouldn't have happened without the amazing hosts who came on board really early to steer them. So Tanya, working in reverse, Tanya today, and then Brian and Jason last week, and then Imogen, who's online, who kicked off our first session, and all the panelists who've been involved as well, some of whom this is kind of a first chance they've had to talk about what they do in this way. And so that has been incredibly meaningful to offer that space for them. And so thank you to everyone who's been involved, and thank you to everyone who's attended as well. It's been a really amazing opportunity. We've had over almost 90 people register for the sessions. And so while life happens, people can't come along, we've been having really good attendance, and it's just given us a platform to start connecting with you all and sharing what we're going to do next. And again, you know, we're volunteer run. We're doing this because we love it, and we are really open to ideas and suggestions about what might happen in the future. One, you know, we're going to keep conversations going. We're hoping again to have another session at the end of the year that will probably be a little possibly more focused on research, because we hope to again partner with the I can never remember the full acronym. It's the
ADSA?
Yeah, ADSA, which is now, it's the Australasian Association of Theatre Studies, Drama, Dance. Yeah, Abby's there. Basically, it's Australia's largest academic network for people in theatre and performance studies, right? And so last year we partnered with them to do a scenography and performance design working group. So we had a day to share research and talk about what we do. So we're hoping to do that again this year and going forward. And so we could keep having conversations about research and all the things that lots of fun. Hey, Sam, thank you. All those intersections there. And so
I just want to say, one of the things I think, if you're interested in doing further study, going to those sorts of conferences is a really great way to kind of just like put your toe in the water and work out if it's the space that you resonate with.
Yeah, totally.
Like, and I think it's like we're trying to keep these things open and free and online as much and as long as we possibly can, so that people can find out if they care, they're passionate about those things. So look out for that. Look out for more info from ScenoLab. We will need to have an annual general meeting or AGM at some point. There's a few positions on the management committee that are still open, and so you can come and play with us and sort of help us shape that. But really, if you feel that you have something that you want to share or a conversation you want to have or be a part of, reach out to me. You can email me personally, or there is a generic ScenoLab email address online. And we could sort of start to map out where the conversations people are interested in having, and then put support around that to occur. And so we don't want to dictate what we talk about. We want to be a mechanism that allows those conversations to happen. And so, yes, and then if you haven't registered, you can jump onto scenolab.com.au and you can register, and we'll begin to connect you with Oystat as well. But yeah, other than that, thank you to everyone who's come along to the sessions. There's nothing without you.